The moment my roommate caught me staring, I was sure I'd wrecked the best friendship of my life. My stomach dropped. My face went hot. For a second, the whole apartment seemed to hold its breath. Then Abigail looked at me, smiled in a way I couldn't read, and said 5 words that changed everything. "You owe me now." 3 years earlier, I'd moved from a small town in Ohio to Nashville, hoping to start over. My name is Caleb. At 28, I felt like I was dragging around 100 disappointments, a failed business, a mountain of debt, and the loss of my father. I couldn't afford a place on my own, so I answered an online listing and ended up splitting an apartment with a woman named Abigail Carter. Abigail was nothing like me. She was fearless, upbeat, endlessly patient. While I spent my evenings staring at overdue bills, she spent hers volunteering around the neighborhood or baking for people she barely knew. She had a gift for making everyone around her feel seen. At first we were just roommates, splitting rent, sharing groceries, trading polite small talk. But somewhere in those first few months, something warmer grew between us. She started noticing when I was struggling before I said a word. After I got turned down for another job, I found a handwritten note on the kitchen table telling me the setback wasn't permanent. On my birthday, when I'd resigned myself to spending it alone, she showed up with a home-cooked meal instead. The truth I never said out loud was that I'd fallen for her. I buried it deep. Abigail deserved someone confident and put together, not a man barely holding his life together. So I told myself friendship was enough. Then one Saturday, everything shifted. Abigail had spent weeks organizing a charity banquet and was finally getting ready to leave for it. I was on the couch, buried in job applications, when she stepped into the hallway in a floral dress, fighting a stuck zipper and laughing at her own frustration. I looked up, not because of the dress, but because of how happy she looked. Something about that smile caught me completely off guard. Of course, that was the exact moment she turned around. Our eyes met. The silence stretched out forever. Then, "You owe me now." I braced for anger. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and came back with a stack of volunteer sign-up forms. Turns out she'd spent months trying to talk me into helping out at the community center, where she volunteered every weekend. Since I'd apparently been caught admiring her happiness, she decided that made me one favor in debt. The next morning, I found myself standing awkwardly inside a community center on Nashville's east side. What started as an obligation slowly became something else entirely. Week after week, I served meals, sorted donations, and mentored teenagers who needed someone in their corner. I met families carrying burdens far heavier than mine, and I listened to stories of resilience and faith that put my own problems in perspective. For the first time in years, I wasn't just thinking about myself. Abigail watched all of it happen without saying much. She never lectured me or tried to fix me. She just kept opening doors and letting me walk through them on my own. Months later, one of the volunteers introduced me to a local business owner named Nathaniel, who offered me a job managing operations for his growing company. It gave me stability, purpose, a future I'd nearly stopped believing in. But the real change wasn't financial. It was that I finally stopped seeing myself as a failure. One evening, after another successful fundraiser, Abigail and I sat outside watching the sky turn orange and gold over Tennessee. Laughter drifted over from families packing up to leave. That's when she told me something that stopped me cold. She'd known about my feelings for a long time, long before that afternoon in the hallway. She'd noticed how I stayed up whenever she worked late, how I remembered the small details of her day, how I celebrated her wins like they were mine. But she hadn't wanted to start something with a man who believed he had nothing to offer. She wanted me to find my own worth first. The tears that came that night weren't sadness. They were gratitude. Abigail's strange little debt had never been about repayment. It had been about rescue. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind, built one small act of kindness at a time. A year later, surrounded by friends, volunteers, and neighbors who'd become woven into both our lives, Abigail and I got married in a simple ceremony, right at the community center where it all began. Standing there holding her hand, I understood something I hadn't before. The greatest gifts often show up looking like inconveniences. The moments that change us rarely look important at the time. And sometimes the people who save us don't do it with grand speeches. They do it with patience, kindness, and faith we've stopped having in ourselves. Even now, whenever someone asks how our story started, Abigail just smiles and brings up that embarrassing afternoon. Then she laughs and says, I finally paid my debt, not with money, not with favors, but by becoming the person she always believed I could be.